Hey yo, what is going on with the viewers of the tube? You better know who I am by now, but if you don't, let me introduce myself as Tyler, the host of the YouTube channel that can make this nerdy thing called crypto pretty damn cool, kind of like these Narhar band geeks. You know how we tromboner. It's time for Chico Crypto. Ouch, what a rough end of the week it seems for the markets all around. Bitcoin, there is no doubt in my mind about it now, is following the stock market. The stock market dumped yesterday and Bitcoin followed it down like a helpless puppy lost in the world. And the follow is more clearly seen pulling out the 5-day chart of the Dow Jones and Bitcoin. Like literally so close to each other, if you layer them on top of each other, it's laughable. So is it time to worry? Is the euphoria ending? And is the reality setting in? Well, you guys better know that I foresee something nasty coming. Since I started this channel, I knew that this decade, 2020, was the decade of radical change and the collapse of the power system called Finance 1.0. I'm sure some of you read this article from The Atlantic, as it shares a very similar outlook as mine regarding US banking, and it's titled "The Looming Banking Collapse. The US financial system could be on the cusp of calamity. This time we might not be able to save it." And I've included that article in the description if you want to give it a read, but right now we're going to break down why they believe we could be near the final collapse, the destruction of Finance 1.0, and the beginning of a new paradigm, which we here at CC believe will be powered by blockchain and crypto. So if you didn't know, nothing got fixed after the 2008 financial crisis. They learned far and few lessons back then, and the laws enacted to stop them from repeating what they did have ultimately failed to do so. Back then, we all know now, the crash came down to home mortgages. Hundreds upon billions of dollars in home loans were packaged into securities called Collateralized Debt Obligations, CDOs. Big banks like Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac would now get liquidity in two ways: by providing the loan to the home buyer and earning the interest, and then by reselling the packaged CDOs to other banks. It was a win-win for those issuing, but they started issuing willy-nilly risky vanilly to people that couldn't afford the loans. And then when the housing market took a hit, the money stopped flowing in from the home buyers, and the money stopped flowing in from everywhere. And the big banks in the middle of it, they were royally fooped. So the Fed had to step in and bail out those big boys with taxpayer dollars. And it worked. It saved the big banks. It saved our economy. In some people's eyes, actually a very select few it saved. But a ton of people are sheep and think a good stock market equals better pay for them. Ridiculous. In actuality, the majority of Americans have been suffering since 2008. Wealth overall has been lost, and the gap between the rich elite and the bottom majority of Americans is growing wider day by day, year by year. The scales, they are out of balance, and since I'm a Libra, I like to bring balance back into this world. And the best way to do that is through education. So let's educate on what the banks and our government have done since 2008. Our government tried to pass reform, the Dodd-Frank Act, which would stop banks from investing in CDOs. But they decided if they stop us there, why not just create the same thing, but in a different arena, like instead of housing and corporate debt. This is called a CLO, or a Collateralized Loan Obligation, and since 2008, bank demand has shifted heavily towards these risky instruments. Like a CDO, a CLO is a security made up of loans, but instead of homes, it's for businesses and corporations. So how big has this grown? Well, the CLO market is estimated to be bigger than the CDO market at its 2007 top. They put estimates near $1 trillion, with $130 billion of that being created since 2018. So at least with mortgages, you were providing a home for Americans. With CLOs, all they are providing is more wealth for the rich. You want to understand why? Well, in July of 2019, almost a year ago, the Fed put out an article titled "Who Owns US CLO Securities?" And in the article, they give a primer on US CLOs. It says the typical US CLO is structured as an offshore special purpose entity in order to benefit from legal isolation of assets as well from a favorable tax treatment. Most US CLOs are issued out of the Cayman Islands by a Cayman resident primary issuer. So what the bat crap craziness is this? Our Fed is okay with fat cats using the Cayman Islands to avoid taxes. And you want to know how exposed they were back then? The article states, our calculations based on the tick data suggest that end of 2018 around 450 billion, 74% of US CLO securities were issued out of the Cayman Islands. And of that, these Cayman issuers issues, 409 billion, 89% were held by US investors at year-end 2018. So do you understand why they did the bailouts now? It was to save this offshore CLO honeypot, which was on the brink of collapse even before the viral panic. November 17th, 2019, article came out of Seeking Alpha, titled Downgrades in the CLO Market, leading to higher default rates in 2020. And the summary states, large banks are highly exposed to CLOs. Corporate bond market has been downgraded to mostly BBB bonds. CCC corporate yields are rising and could spill over to BBB bonds. And this graph shows what he means pretty well, as most of the corporate bonds are held in BBB rated. Now, before this viral panic, the rules with corporate debt CLOs were much different. Central banks, they couldn't buy junk bonds as they were too risky. But with economies coming to a grinding halt, those businesses who took out loans who were not rated junk, BBB, or higher were about to slip into nasty junk dog poopy category. That is why the Fed created the Secondary Corporate Market Credit Facility, which allowed central banks, including the Fed, as we can see from the document, to purchase BBB- as of March 2nd, 2020, which means they could have slipped even lower into the Cs and the central banks can still buy them up. And the danger in these, they are all leveraged loans, which means the falls or gains are always exacerbated. You guys know leverage in crypto, right? Well, it's just as freaking strong, if not stronger, in the CLO market. The Financial Stability Board talked about it in December of last year in a research article titled Vulnerabilities Associated with Leveraged Loans and Collateralized Loan Obligations. And guess what they found? From the article, roughly 20% of the estimated outstanding leveraged loans and 14% of CLOs are unaccounted for, US $683 billion and US $106 billion respectively. Unaccounted for? What in the bejesus does that mean? Well, that means lost or disregarded. It means not present, and there is no explanation for what has happened to it. And that is what happens when the money is going through the Cayman Islands, by the way. Who are the culprits? Well, from the FSB research piece, both public and supervisory data indicate that banks' exposure to leveraged loans and CLOs is highly concentrated in a limited number of global systematically important banks. And which banks? Well, the GSIBs are listed right here by the FSB, JP Morgan Chase, Citigroup, HSBC, Bank of America, Bank of China, Barclays, BNP Paribas, Deutsche, Goldman Sachs, and 21 more. Now, that Atlantic article put together a great infographic of the possible scenario of a CLO tumble. As we can see, yellow is BBB, light blue is BB, blue is B, CC or lower is pink, and default is red. As we can see before the panic, the lower layer was the riskiest, while the AAA layer was the least risky, and the lower layers shielded the top layers. But right now, the lower layer is starting to default, and other CLOs are being downgraded. And they show how, if the current economic conditions persist or worsen, widespread defaults could not only hit the lower layer, but the top AAA layers as well. Now, I will tell you, this is scary. This might be devastating because the only thing that is keeping our economy alive is the boomers, Wall Street, and the 401ks, which rely on corporations and businesses across America. This goes out the window, the entire thing does, and unfortunately, it's going to happen in my opinion. And our precious BTC won't be immune. The next crash will no doubt see a significant amount of Stonks and BTC liquidated to cover whatever financial obligations the holders of those assets may have. It's going to be a downward spiral that will hit hard, and it will hit everything. And it will hurt on the surface, as it will seem there will be no way to recover. But I've been saying this for some time. It will be a blessing in disguise, the opportunity to rise with the Phoenix, Finance 2.0. Cheers, I'll see you next time.